Hello everyone, and welcome to a very interesting game that comes as a suggestion from a subscriber. Here you have it. Mr. YTMND Man suggests Gyula Breyer versus Johannes Esser 1917. He says it's one of the deepest moves ever. So I'm very interested if it's indeed one of the deepest moves ever, and what will your thoughts about it be. So while we're waiting to continue with the Bobby Fischer series, I do have a couple of books on Fischer which I really enjoy, like My Friend Bobby Fischer by Dmitry Belica, and also Boris Spassky on the Move, which is essentially about Boris Spassky, but at one point, they meet, so it's basically two books that join into one. But I also ordered a book specifically about the 1972 match in Reykjavik by Svetozar Gligoric and one by Larry Evans. So I will only continue the series once the book arrives and once I study them a bit, as I want to make the series as nice as possible. Should be somewhere around 4 to 5 days, so up until then I'm just going to be checking up on some of your suggestions and, perhaps follow up on something that's currently going on in the world. So here we have a game between Gyula Breyer and Johannes Esser. Gyula Breyer was one of Hungarian's strongest chess players. He was also a Budapest champion in 1912. A very strong player for a long time. For example, I believe it's in 1917, he won first place in Berlin ahead of really strong players like Efim Bogoljubov, Sauli Tartakover, Richard Reti, Geza Marozzi. So quite a player, and he plays against Johannes Esser, who I don't really have a photo of and don't have any additional information about him, but he is a pretty strong player. As one of his most notable games is his great victory in Budapest over Richard Reti, none other than. So definitely a strong player, and Gyula Breyer also has a positive score against Max Uwe, also says something about his strength. And this is a very interesting game. Hope you enjoy it. Now let's check out what's this deep move all about. We have Breyer opens with d4. We have d5, c4, and c6. And it might be important to mention that Gyula Breyer was one of the leading pioneers of the hypermodern school of chess, alongside Richard Reti. Basically, the hypermodern school of chess was about not controlling the center with the pawns, at least not in the beginning of the game, rather with the pieces, so such as the Reti opening knight to f3, where you want to fianchetto your bishops, and so on and so on. But as you see in this game, Breyer also used c4 and d4. And also e4 in some games. So okay, we have c6, the Slav defense, e3, knight to f6, knight to c3, and e6. Richard Reti also commented on this game, which I'll put a link in the description below so you can check out some of his comments as well. He says that this is the e3 move, although somewhat tame, is something Breyer usually wanted to do. He wanted to keep his pieces behind his pawns so he can unleash them later. So okay, bishop to d3, we have bishop to d6, and now f4. It's very interesting here. The engine gives knight to f3 as the strongest move, and Reti specifically says that f4 is a much stronger move because it doesn't block the f2 pawn with the knight. So first you play f4, and only then you play knight to f3. Which is very interesting because the engine prefers knight to f3 to f4 like a lot. But I wouldn't dismiss what Reti says so lightly, because Reti, like we've mentioned, is a hypermodern player. He's all about strategic openings, making long-term plans, not about any tactical shots or anything like that. And we've seen in the Alpha Zero games that engines are not all-knowing. So okay, f4, we have castles, knight to f3. Now that the d4 and f4 pawn have been played, the d5 square will be an excellent outpost for the knight. D captures on c4, and now white doesn't automatically recapture, but rather bishop to b1. Why waste a move to recapture a pawn? It's basically just to double the pawn here, and you can have a nice bishop on b1 eyeing the black king, and pretty much all of your pieces are eyeing the black king. The queen will at some point most likely come to h5, the knight can come to g5, an excellent attacking position for white. Black pushes b5, preparing b4. And it will not be all that easy to develop this light square bishop. This is also something Reti mentions. If white captured this c4 pawn, then bishop to h6 would be a nice developing move for the bishop. Now that black's own pawn is blocking it with it being on c4, there's really no point in playing bishop to h6. If there are any newer subscribers to this channel, as usual, I am wearing a hoodie to honor the hoodie guy, as we don't have a photo of him. e4, and now bishop to e7. You don't want to play b4, although it is possible. You don't want to run into e5, for example, captures, and now white does have this very strong central pawn chain, but he will have to break it at some point. But black can simply continue playing bishop b7 castles, and it's a fine position for black. But black first goes bishop to e7. We have knight to g5, h6, and now we have a position that you will often meet in your own blitz games. For example, you have this beautiful light square bishop eyeing the black king. You have the dark square bishop also eyeing the h6 pawn, of course through the pawn and the knight. You can perhaps unleash this rook from h1. The queen can also perhaps join the attack. So here there's really no point in moving back the knight. White continues the attack simply with h4, offering a knight here. And more often than not, when someone offers you his knight this way by playing h4, it's most likely not a good idea to capture it. For example, if you capture it here and attack the f6 knight, you can't move the knight. You have to give the material back. If you move it, then queen to h5 followed by queen to h7 or h8 will be checkmate. If f6 is pushed, then you can push even g6. But okay, if you try and stop the attack, let's say g6, simply g captures on f6. Bishop captures e5 now. Bishop moves, and now queen to f3. The threat, of course, is still queen h3 followed by queen to h7 checkmate. And here it's simply a much better position for white. There's no one would like playing this with black. Of course, you cannot capture on d4. You're simply gonna get this queen to h3 move after some developing moves. And now, if you move the rook, then bishop to c5 will guard the f8 square. Again, queen to h7 will be a threat. And if f5, then knight to e4 is a destroyer. For example, pawn captures, queen h7, king moves. Now bishop captures here. The threat is capturing on g6. Whatever you do, you're still gonna get checkmated or lose a whole lot of material. So this is only one of the things that can happen if you capture on g5. So g6 first. Not allowing this queen to come to h5 in the future. We have e5 here, and only now h captures on g5. And okay, you don't want to capture back on f6, you want to open lines, so h captures on g5. We have knight to d5, offering a trade on d5, and this is the critical moment of the game where the magic happens, and this is why the title of the video is what it is, and why Mr. YTMNDman says that it's one of the deepest moves ever. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find that deepest move ever. It's not an easy move to find. It's hard to say if it's even the greatest move. It's such a deep position that anything could be possible here. But yeah, just feel free to pause the video here and think about the position for a bit. What would you play here? I'll give it a couple of seconds for you to decide, as usual. So, for those of you who paused the video and thought about the position, congratulations. You are an excellent thinker, as the weekend is coming. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, in this position, Gyula Breyer played king to f1. Now, king to f1 seems like a very impressive move. I mean, of course, there must be something behind it. We named the video after it, after all. The reason he played king to f1 is next. For example, a lot of you who have paused the video and thought about the position probably consider something like queen to f3 or g4 followed by h3 and checkmating the black king. So let's see what happens. If queen to g4, then king to g7 is coming. And now you don't really have the option of playing something like queen to h3 because rook to h8 will stop your attack. So you would have to sacrifice a rook here. After king captures, let's say queen h5 check, the g pawn is pinned from the bishop, you cannot capture the queen. And now after king g8, bishop captures, king moves, queen h6 check, and after king moves comes this. Of course, black can always draw this game. White can always draw this game by repeating moves here, but of course you want to win the game. g6, and now of course the threat is queen to h7 checkmate. The problem is black can actually win this game now because he has bishop to h4 check. You have to react to this. Your king is in check, you move the king, and now comes queen to e7. And now you've defended h7. White has no ways of continuing this attack. You are down so much material, and you are just going to lose this game as white. After this knight to d5 move, white saw all of this, and he decided, okay, so simply king to f1. There will now be bishop to h4 check in the future, because my king is now on f1, so now my idea must work, right? Well, let's see if this is in fact so. Black played knight captures on c3. Okay, eliminating one of the pieces. B captures on c3, and now bishop to b7. A very interesting move, although there isn't really a good move here. If you tried, you know, a preemptive strike against white's queen g4 idea with king to g7, it doesn't work because white will immediately sacrifice a rook with rook to h7 without even touching the queen. King captures, only now comes queen to h5 check, king g8, bishop captures with check, king to h8, queen to h6, king moves, g6, as we've already mentioned, and now of course there is no bishop to h4 check, so you have to play rook to f7 to stop checkmate. Captures, queen to h5 check, king to g7, and now f5. This is all something Gyula Breyer had to see if he played king to f1. So this is really amazing, because this is a completely winning position for white. For example, e captures on f5, and now bishop to h6 check, king to h7, and now queen to f7 check doesn't quite work because king captures, and now after you move the king, you can always block with bishop to h4. You will not be able to deliver this rook to h1. So instead of queen to f7, you can go e6. e6 is a killer move because now you open up the e file, and now the rook can enter the attack via the e file. And you have to capture it. If you don't capture it, for example, if you try something like bishop to f6, you're just going to get bishop to f8 check. King moves, now comes queen f7, because the pawn is now on e6, so queen f7 is possible. King moves, and now king to e2, and now there is no defense against rook to h1. Even if you do something like this, doesn't really matter, rook h1 check. And after you block, then comes queen to g7, because the bishop is no longer guarding the g7 square. So this would in fact be checkmate. So after e6, you would definitely have to capture on e6. Bishop captures, but now comes rook to e1 with a threat against the light square bishop, and the rook of course wants to enter the game. So what can you do here? If you move the bishop, let's say bishop to g8, bishop to f8 is a checkmate in one move, of course, as the king has nowhere to go. On the other hand, if you try something different, let's say you try and move the bishop back to c8, then you get bishop to f8 check, king moves, and now bishop captures here, and now it's all over. You have to move the queen, and then of course queen g6 is coming, and black is getting checkmated. So a very interesting position, and we're still only at move 15. So king to g7 doesn't work because the rook is immediately coming to h7 with a nice rook sacrifice. So black tried bishop to b7. He thought, I can't move the king, I'll just move my bishop. Seems like a reasonable plan. White played queen to g4, of course. Now pretty much forcing black to play king to g7, and there's no other defense. You have to play king to g7 here. So now black has to play it, but now to make matters worse, the black bishop is on b7, not on c7, helping out with the defense here. So we have the same variation. King g7, rook h7, you have to sacrifice the rook. King captures, queen to h5 check, king moves, now comes captures with check, king moves, queen to h6 check, king to g8, now comes g6. Of course, there is no bishop to h4 check, since we played this beautiful king to f1 move. Rook to f7, you have to give up some material to prevent checkmate. King, g captures on f7, king captures, and now queen to h5 check. King to g7, and now of course f5. pawn captures, bishop to h6 check, king to h7, and now the bishop left the c8 square, so it's no longer necessary to play e6. Here we have, although e6 is still possible and it does in fact lead to checkmate, but bishop to g5 was played in the game, which is sufficient. King to g8, we have queen to g6 check, king to h8, and here Breyer misses a very nice opportunity to bring the game to an end with bishop to f6 check. Because if bishop captures, pawn captures, you're threatening checkmate here. After queen to g8, you have queen to h5 check, queen to h7, you have queen check here. Again, black has to block, and now, of course, all of you see the move. I'm just going to give you a second to see the move, because this can happen to you very often in your own games. Simply f7, and now it's all over. You're threatening checkmate, and of course, if captures, then you bring another queen into the game. And although black has some material here, it's pretty much meaningless. White can always simply move his king and bring the rook into the game and win the game that way. So after king to h8, queen to h6 was played with check. Sorry about that. King to g8 and now queen to e6 check, a move order that really wasn't necessary. King to f8 was played, and now queen captures on f5 with check. King to g7, and now comes bishop to h6 with check. So now you've seen what could have happened, and this game could have already been over, but now white decides to further give up some material, and he will try to checkmate the black king. We have king captures and king to e2. Now, of course, rook to h1 is a terrible threat. Bishop to c8 was played. You have to move the king immediately from the h file and not allow rook to h1 to come with check, so bishop will be able to block it. But instead, bishop to c8 was played. And okay, still playable. Rook to h1 check, bishop to h4, and now e6. A very nice move by white. Queen to e7, and now comes queen to f4, going after the bishop on h4. We have king to g7, rook captures on h4, and now queen captures on h6, on e6 with check. King to d2, and here you have to bust open the queen side, immediately go after the white king, because, I mean, although you are up material, all of your pieces are undeveloped. You have to do something about this. But here, black played knight to a6, and this was not the greatest move. We have rook to h5. The threat, of course, being rook to g5 check, followed by queen to h4. And here, black makes a terrible mistake. Although there isn't really a move that's good, like bishop to d7 is playable, but black doesn't find it, and he actually plays queen to f6. So feel free to pause the video here if you are perhaps a novice chess player and find the winning idea here for white. I'll give you a couple of seconds for you to decide. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you are an excellent rook mover. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, rook to h7 with check, of course, wins the game. If you capture, then you're going to lose the queen, but there's no better move. Even if you play something like this, then it's even worse. You're getting rook to h6 check, and now you're going to lose the queen for nothing. And also you're getting checkmated. So king captures on h7 was played. We have queen captures on f6. And now you have a problem. The knight has no squares. This is taken, this is taken. If you go to c7, then queen checks and picks up the knight. If you move the bishop to d7, also check and you lose the bishop. If you move it anywhere else, you can't move it here, you can't move it here due to the queen. This is guarded by the pawn. There's no move black can play here, even though he does have material, some material to compensate for the queen. But it's pointless. Bishop to g4 was played, but now comes queen to h4 check, king g7, and queen captures on g4 with check. King f6, queen to f3 check, king to e7, queen to c6 check. Sorry, without check, but queen to c6 attacking the knight and the rook. We have rook moves to g8, and now queen captures on a6. Rook captures on g2, and now king to c1. And here, it was in this position that Johannes Esser resigned the game. So a really wild game, and it could have gone either way. White really messed up at that one point where he didn't want to play bishop to f6, the move we mentioned here. He continued queen to h6 instead of winning the game immediately with bishop to f6. But, you know, you have to keep the drama going. That's what makes a chess game great. But it's very important that also Richard Vetti mentions that on move 14, let me just check move 14, where knight captures on c3 was played. If instead of this, black immediately makes room for the queen to join e7 by playing bishop to b4, then the idea is next. Captures on d5, captures on d5, and now bishop to e3. After king to g7, now rook to h7 check is just as good. Captures, queen h5 check, king moves, check here, king moves, captures, captures, captures with check, king moves, and now comes king to e2, because now the g pawn is still here, the bishop is misplaced, and now rook to h1 will be deadly. So yeah, a very nice game, and you know, I do hope you enjoyed it. I'm gonna check up on some of your other suggestions as well. But yeah, this position here, it's very interesting that such a move happens already on move 14. So it's move 14 here, and white decides king to f1. What a move, and you know, what a move to start the weekend indeed. So there we have it. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank David de Becare, Mohammad Reza Kxh7, and Shai Desha for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, hopefully with some more interesting content. And I'm very interested in your opinion. Do share in the comments. Was the suggester of this video correct? Is this one of the deepest moves ever? Thank you all, and I'll see you soon.